Well, if you live long enough, you better keep finding new tricks. That may be true. That may not be true. The last time I was here in Ann Arbor several years ago, I gave a lecture. I was requested to give a lecture called the Hopwood Lecture on poetry, on my poetry and poetics, and I gave a little talk called Remaining Unprepared, which is a quotation from the great 18th century haiku poet in Japan, Yosa Buson, who said, "In thinking about writing poetry, the most important thing is to remain unprepared." And I love that. It's true. Some of my better poems, I won't even say best, came to me because I wasn't prepared. And when you are prepared, it doesn't matter. It's not much. So that is the difference between art, and commercial art. Commercial art, you're prepared to try to fulfill some public need or some economic need that is identifiable, or academic need, whatever it is. But there's one more final step in art. This isn't just poetry, it's all of art, where nobody was asking for it. And that's the best, is to do something that nobody even knew they wanted. Sounds like Steve Jobs a little bit, but... so I'm going to read tonight from my most recent little collection of poems, which I have not yet read anywhere in Ann Arbor because they wouldn't let me. The last time I just got to talk about poetry. But this time they didn't ask me to talk about poetry, they just asked me to do this, and I'm so happy to do it. Of course, I have critical feelings about certain things. I don't know if I would want to call a place White Lotus Farm, because the White Lotus is not native to Michigan. Speaking of being a locavore, we have to think about that, yeah. And a very good friend of mine who just took over a marvelous estate in the Sierra Nevada that is has great water. It's so fortunate. It has hundreds of gallons of water that just flow through in natural springs. You know, we don't even tell the county, let alone the state, that such a place exists up in that part of the Sierra. And it was planted over 25 years by a very energetic gentleman who thought he ought to take advantage of all that water. But I said, I'm going to report this to the California Native Plant Society, which is just a joke, but you're not supposed to, in California anymore, we're not supposed to plant things that are not native to California if possible. And if that's not possible, then the next best is to plant something from a drought-adapted climate that does not require that you water it in the summertime. California, you know, has a 6-month summer drought. And that's why we don't really think, you know, a lot of us don't think that well, this isn't really a drought yet, it's just a dry year. So there are 5, this is a, I'm always trying to give people more information than I should. The drought-adapted Mediterranean-type climates are 5 on the planet. They are not huge, they are not terribly common. They constitute, of course, the Mediterranean, and then California, and then the southern coast of Chile, and then the southeastern coast of Australia, and then the very southern coast of South Africa. Those are the areas in the world where plants have to learn to get by with 6 months of no water and 4 winter months of a huge amount of water. And not all drought-adapted plants can handle having a lot of water. So that is the particular adaptation of the Mediterranean world. There is a book on that, folks. It's called The 5 Mediterranean Climates and Their Plant Life. But it's too technical for most of us. So that's that's part of the education that we're trying to work through for ourselves, let alone all the newcomers that have come since World War II, who still think that they are living in New England and want to have a green lawn, which is now officially a no-no. No green lawns. And no washed cars either. Okay, I'm going to read poems. This is called Gnarly. Like gnarly. Splitting 18-inch long rounds of pine from a beetle kill tree that we felled so it wouldn't smash a shed, with a borrowed splitter, Briggs and Stratton 20-ton pressure wedge on a piston push rod. Some rounds fall clean down, split in two. Some tough and thready, knotty, full of frass and galleries. Gnarly. My woman, she was sweet. Why I take good care of my Macintosh. I wrote this for the very first Macintosh computer I ever owned, back about 86 or 87. So that poor Macintosh has long gone to its reward, whatever that is, but because it broods under its hood like a perched falcon, because it jumps like a skittish horse and sometimes throws me, because it's pokey when cold, because plastic is a sad, strong material that is charming to rodents, because it's flighty, because my mind flies into it through my fingers, and it leaps forward and backward and is an endless sniffer and searcher, because its keys click like hail on boulders, and it winks when it goes out, and puts word heaps into hoards for me, dozens of pockets of gold under boulders in stream beds, identical seed pods strong on a vine, or it stores bins of bolts, and I loose them and find them again. Because whole worlds of writing can be boldly laid out and then highlighted and vanish in a flight, a delete. So it teaches of impermanence and pain. And my computer and me are both brief in this world, both foolish. We have earthly fates, because I have let it move in with me right inside the tent. And it goes with me out every morning. We fill up our baskets, get back home, feel rich, relax. I throw it a scrap, and it hums. Artemis and Pan. Thoreau said, "The wildness of the savage is but a faint symbol of the awful ferrety with which good men and lovers meet." That is in the essay Walking. Ferrety is an interesting word. It is in the dictionary probably only because of Thoreau. It means fierceness. The field of the wild. Ainu word, iworu. Feeling the field, out back, the ears, outside the eyes, faint whiff, loose knees. Two fluff gray squirrels' tails whip round an oak's gray bark, wildly horny, ferociously aloof, the ferrety of lovers. Pan and Artemis, bow twang or open sight .270 barks a puff, brings down a deer, and skin it together, eat fresh liver, cooked over embers, in the silvery light of the moon. I was reading a lot of Greek, rereading a lot of Greek classics at this time. Anger, cattle, and Achilles. Two of my best friends quit speaking. One said his wrath was like that of Achilles. The three of us had traveled in the desert, awakened to bird songs and sunshine under ironwoods in a wadi south of the border. They both were herders, one with cattle and poems, the other with businesses and books. One almost died in a car crash, but slowly recovered. The other gave up all his friends, took refuge in a city, and studied the nuances of power. One of them I haven't seen in years. I met the other lately in the back of a bar. Musicians playing near the window, and he sweetly told me, "Listen to that music. The self we hold so dear will soon be gone." The Wrath of Achilles, one of the great moments in classical literature. Here's a little humanities test for you. Why was Achilles angry? What was her name? Huh? Right. Okay. America wins again. Yeah. Briseis. Yeah. Agamemnon. This is a little insight into Jewish. What do I mean by saying that? In Greek, classical culture. That Agamemnon, their leading hero, their absolute master of killing the enemy, nonetheless could not speak against Agamemnon, his general. And so when Agamemnon took his 18-year-old lover, who lived in the tent with him, who was the one he wanted, took her away from him back to his tent, Achilles had anger that lasted for days, but he could not say it out. So he simply sulked for a month in his tent and did not go out from the tent. That's the wrath of Achilles. That's an interesting insight, isn't it, as anthropologists here?
Write it down.
Okay, well, I'm just warming up here. You know the story of Actaeon and Diana or Artemis. It's one of the great little classic stories, which is in Ovid, and Ovid's Metamorphoses is written in very elegant Latin in the 1st century A.D., which is his retelling and revision of a sizable proportion of the Greek mythological storytelling world. 1,000 years of Greek storytelling brought together in one volume, which you can get from the Loeb Library in 2 volumes. and read the Latin on one side and the English on the other. It's still going. So that was the book. Ovid's Metamorphoses, which means changes or transformations, by Publius Ovidius Naso, who had been exiled from Rome for some kind of unspeakable behavior. So he had to go to the coast of Bulgaria, right on the Black Sea, and spend the rest of his life in exile. So he wrote the Metamorphoses. All of this we should all know, because Ovid was one of the two major Latin writers that young men and women of the aristocracy in Europe read through the Middle Ages and then through the Renaissance. They read Livy's History of Rome, which told you that if you behave in the right way, your government can rule the world. And they read Ovid, who said, men, women, and animals can all make love with each other. And they had many examples of how they did it. It's really two very different directions. And so if you go to the big museum in Madrid called the Prado and wander around through the rooms, you'll find a number of rooms that are full of big paintings of warfare and crucifixes and Madonnas holding babies. And then you wander into other rooms, and it's full of naked ladies at picnics. And so one is reflecting all the reading that the young people of Europe did from Ovid, and the other is reflecting all the young people's readings from Livy. And that is actually the schizophrenia of Europe, which has not yet been resolved. That's why they came to America, hoping to get away from it, but they haven't quite. Okay, now I'm back to one story. The goddess Diana or Artemis is generally thought to have been a virgin. Well, that's not really true. Instead she had a particular magical power that enabled her to restore her virginity once a year. And that was, she went to a pool, a little pool deep in the forest with some of her handmaids, and she could splash water in the pool and become a virgin again. Actaeon was a son of a king who was out hunting deer with his hounds. And he was, on the chase. His hounds were running and yapping. And he just noticed out of the side of his eye that there was kind of a nice looking pool over there. And then he saw there was a naked lady standing in it. And that really got his attention. And she saw him seeing her. So she waved a little bit in his direction. And he started changing into a deer. And his antlers started coming out. He got hair all over him. He fell down on all fours. The first thing he knew, his own hounds were barking at him. So the story finishes with Actaeon as a deer, running away and being chased and eventually killed by his own deer. That's one of the great classical stories that are part of the lore of the Occidental tradition. So the only thing I'm going to bore you with is the names of his hounds, because it is such a rare thing to find. The names of his hounds as translated into English. And these were the hounds that were chasing him and who brought him all down and killed him. Blackfoot, trail follower, voracious, gazelle, mountain ranger, fawn killer, hurricane, hunter, winged, sylvan, glen, shepherd, Caesar, catcher, runner, ganasher, spot, tigress, might, white, soot, Spartan, whirlwind, swift, Cyprian, wolf, grasper, black, shag, fury, white tooth, barker, black hare, beast killer, mountaineer. That's culture, folks. Another bit of culture. Old New Mexican genetics. New Mexico, USA, right? In Santa Fe, at the Palace of the Governors, there is this 18th century list of all the genetic possibilities that were living in that area at that time. The terminology: Espanol, white, but maybe a Mexican, or anyone who has enough money and the right style to be called white. Indio, a Native American person. Mestizo, one Spanish and one Indio parent. Quebrado, broken color, a rare category of three-way or more mix like white, African, Indio. Mulatto, white African ancestry. Coyote, an Indio parent with mestizo parents. Lobo, one Indio plus one African parent. Henjizaro is a translation of Spanish of the Turkish word janissary. Plains Indian captives sold and used as slaves. I don't know if that's still up, but 10 years ago that was publicly displayed in a panel at the Palace of the Governors in Santa Fe, and it gives us at least some pointers for doing a better job with our next survey of the population of America. A little more subtlety. Michel de Tome, at the edge of the canyon, the Killigrew place. And I read this in part in celebration and in honor of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition that is being developed here. Michel de Tome, a French-speaking Belgian aristocrat kid, ended up being a Vajrayana Buddhist and living out in the country, way out in the country like I do, where I've been off the grid for 45 years. The Michel Killigrew de Tome place, on a fine ledge of land out over the steep South Canyon, drops off to a far river roar through the brush. Huge old oaks, and once was a small, worn house where a logger and family with kids all lived and then left. A year-round spring on the slope up so high, welcome surprise. Michael and Tove, Theo and Mike, Julie and Za all made it work. With cows and chickens and gardens and ponds, barns and studio, books and paintings, all made again and again, and the grandfather's sword from Japan that the emperor had given him. Over the canyon, just down from Bald Mountain, paintings of slopes and of clouds in the deep blue sky, and his echoing conch, the mantras, the smiles, the malas and hikes. Mad Michael, a genius, a leader, a visionary English-Belgian Turtle Island elder, here in this room where he lay with his cancer, his friends, his beads, calming them, easing them, utterly sane, and then slipped away. There are a lot of people like that. the more we could honor them and the more we could remember them, the better. But it's hard to, because they're locally famous, locally influential, locally powerful, but they never become celebrities, not even local celebrities. And that's where not only local food, but local culture, begins to really count, and local storytelling begins to count. Stories that nobody else is going to hear and nobody else wants to hear, perhaps, that carry some really powerful information that you need if you want to live there, to be there, that you need to know. And we have a lot of that where I live, which is an area that was first settled in the 1850s with the beginning of the gold rush. And the memories of that are still around, and the people that did it are still around. And there is a very large number of ditches, deep ditches, 8 feet wide, 7 or 8 feet deep, on the slope of on the contour that curve through the hills of the region, and nobody knows what those ditches were for, except that everyone says it was dug by Chinese. And it must have had something to do with hydraulic mining, but we can't make the connections. We can't find where they were supposed to go even. And it's just one of the strange mysteries that has no stories behind it even. It's so curious. Starting the spring garden and thinking of Thomas Jefferson. Turning this cloddish and still damp and cold soil with a heavy curved crofter's spade. And finally, I've read the life of Thomas Jefferson. Here we are, about the same age. Hundreds of workers on the farm and fixing the house while he mostly wrote letters, and he was thinking. True democracy is to help everyone do for themselves, which means we must think with the help of the whole neighborhood. Bullshit detectors in place, but cleanly and clearly forgiving, to be free to get past too much lonely, stubborn, deluded private thirst for what? For things? For some small perks? So give and take. Where was Jefferson in this, I wonder? Whacking clods, tossing clumps of winter grass roots to the side, scooping out and heeling in some Asian aubergines, the long thin kind that you grill with grated ginger. Everyone free to decide to join in on the work and the play, empowered to be free of me, in a world which both has and has not hierarchy. But he had slaves and never thought that through. And Tom had friends like Madison and Adams to honestly argue him down and explain the cracks in his dream. Now, out on the far west coast of the continent, this rough mountain pine tree land, 200 years later, putting another turn on whatever he thought we could do, Tom Jefferson. Never too late. Never be through. You always can pick up a hoe and let your people go. Log truck on the 80. Heading west down Interstate 80, last slope before the valley, pass a loaded log truck. Incense cedars with that stringy bark. Mind watching lanes ahead. Roams back to the mountains on the left side of the river, out toward Forest Hill, or back toward Duncan Canyon, or south to Sailor Meadow, dark forests pass in my mind, and I see a shady canyon, tangled gully under old pine and fir, and there the fresh-cut stumps of cedar, and someone napping with his chainsaw after lunch. This is something somebody was quoting. Oh, Keith was quoting this. Fixing the System is a little series of poems that this comes from. Fixing the system. Under the topless, bottomless, empty blue sky. Hands and knees looking down a little hole. Leaky gate valve. Drip, drip. You know, I really love that topless, bottomless blue sky. Think about it. Stand here and think about it. That's what it is. Reinventing North America. This is a little kind of a program. Living on the western edge of Turtle Island, in Shasta Nation, whose people are Native, Euro, African, Asian, Mestizo, Pacific, and Nuevo Americanos, Turtle Islanders, where the dominant language is still Americano, in the Homo sapiens year 50,000. That's placing us for that time. However, you know, within another 6 months, Americano will no longer be the dominant language in California. It'll be Espanol. What a waste of time studying French in high school was. If I'd only known. I thought French was more cultured. Well, I'm going to try this one on you. It's called Eiffel Tundra, and it's a haibun, roughly, which is a Japanese poetic tradition of a chunk of prose followed by a haiku. Except, you know, I can't write prose that well, and then I can't write haiku at all. Even though I won an international haiku prize and was flown to Japan to get it, but I complained and protested all the way, saying, I don't write haiku. I don't understand how to do it. I just write short poems. They wouldn't let me off the hook. Eiffel Tundra, that's the Eiffel Tower. Graceful, several million rivets as it arcs up a lath work of steel riveted webs. The first level ascended either by the stairway or a slightly inclined funicular lift that has an upper and lower section to carry passengers in. Up to the first level, which has a full-scale quality restaurant, as well as a sort of bistro, and some exhibits on the construction of the tower. Then the next level up, another few hundred feet to a somewhat smaller area with outlook platforms, some glassed in, another one not, and a stand-up coffee place. From there you get into the direct elevator that goes to the summit. It's a fast elevator considering how much it gains, and at the top there are 2 levels. Still, the lower level is glassed in. Step up to the next level and you are really out in the wind. Above that is another 100 feet or so, with control room connected to a high mast that is studded with electronic equipment, repeaters, what all. When they built the Eiffel Tower, they had no idea what good use there would be to electronics in the future. Everyone is bundled up, the usual complement of a few East Asians, not crowded, but these are hardy people. And I take my time to gaze down from behind the protection of a glass enclosure out of the wind on each section of the city. Half an hour studying each block and section while referring back to my map. It's nowhere a kind of grid town, though. There are repetitions of the radiating star road motif, particularly outward from the Arc de Triomphe. The entire tower is repainted, they say, every 5 years. Chill wind, air gray and misty, looking down on tundra, frost heave shapes, polygons, faint aurochses and mammoths, browsing in the fog. And I want to acknowledge Clayton Eshelman's presence here, because it was Clayton who first, thank you. It was Clayton who first pointed out to me, I never would have figured it out myself, the curious ways that the plural works on the term, on the name of the giant prehistoric wild cattle that roamed through Europe at one time and that are said to be the ancestors of all our current cattle, the Oryx. The Oryx is already, the word Oryx already ends with an S. So if you want to say many Oryx, you have to say Oryxes. Isn't that right? Yeah, I got it right, okay. So I put it in a poem. Now I'm giving Clayton credit for that. Kill. The women share in the kill. The women are first at the kill. The women kill the kill. 3 straight vertical lines tattooed on the shaved, plucked mons, the Kalahari Desert of southern Africa. There's a book about that by a young woman anthropologist from America. And the title of the book is Women Love Meat. She wasn't wasting her time. Muchi's Persimmons. Muchi, otherwise known as Fachan, 13th century, a Zen monk and also a painter whose paintings were really well known and very much in demand. A number of his paintings went as trade items to Osaka and then to Kyoto, and so some of them are in the Zen temples at Daitokuji, and that's how I came to know them. He was from South China. And probably for the Western world, the most famous painting by Muchi is the one that's called the Persimmons. That is just a little tray of persimmon fruit in a painting that is no larger than this. It's quite elegant, and it is kept in a temple in the Daitokuji complex, a temple called Ryoko-in, and it is, you may go and see it one day a year. And the rest of the time, it's not there to be seen. But you can get perfect scale reproductions of it through a very fine printer called Benrido, which I did do. So this is Muchi's Persimmons. On a back wall down the hall, lit by a side glass door, is the scroll of Mucci's great Sumi painting, Persimmons. The wind weights hanging from the axles hold it still. The best painting in the world, I say, of Persimmons. Perfect statement of emptiness, no other than form. The twig and the stalk still on, the way they sell them in the market even now. The original is in Kyoto at a lovely Rinzai temple where they show it every year. This one is a perfect copy from Benrido. I chose the mounting elements myself, with the advice of the mounter. I hang it every fall. And now, to these overripe persimmons from Mike and Barbara's orchard, napkin in hand, I bend over the sink, suck the sweet orange goop, that's how I like it, gripping a little twig. These painted persimmons sure cure hunger. Dogen said, "There is no remedy for satisfying hunger than a painted rice cake." I don't know if you folks hear this on the radio in this part of the United States, but out where we are, periodically on the radio you'll hear somebody say 94% of wildfires are human caused. And this is of course not true. Also the Forest Service, even though it knows better, is still saying only you can stop forest fires. And that's the Smokey the Bear, so to speak, a mantra. Only you can stop more forest fires. And I used to believe that until I started studying lightning strikes in the mountains of the West, and found out that there are an estimated 20,000 lightning strikes every summer in the Sierra Nevada, not to mention the rest of the West. And you can go into it more deeply if you like. There were 6 fires started in one night in Northern California a couple of weeks ago, all from lightning. A lot of them were small and you can get at them and put them out. But up and down the world, in and out of the world, lightning strikes have been dancing around for millennia, for millions of years. And wildfire has to be simply part of the world we live in. And I find it actually rather refreshing. Nonetheless, I am very highly organized in preparation for fire, because like many other people out there, where I live, if a fire got started, it would be over us. If there was any wind at all, it'd be over us in anywhere from 20 minutes to a couple of hours. And so I keep 8 or 10 archive boxes labeled in the entranceway, right where I can drive my pickup truck. And these are the boxes that I will take and evaluate with if I have to flee a fire. And most of my neighbors do the same. However, we also have our tools out, and if the wind isn't blowing too strong, we'll stand and fight the fire. And if we're lucky, maybe the Forest Service will get there. But they've got their hands full. Wildfire news. For millions, for hundreds of millions of years, there were fires. Fire after fire. Fire raging forest or jungle. Giant lizards dashing away. Big necks from the sea looking out over the land in surprise. Fire after fire. lightning strikes by the thousands, just like today. Volcanoes erupting, fire flowing over the land. Huge sequoia trees, 2-foot thick fireproof bark. Fire pines, their cones love the heat. How long to say? That's how they covered the continents. 10 lakhs of millennia or more. I have to slow down my mind. Slow down my mind. Rome was built in a day. You know the Iceman, the 4,000-year-old frozen, semi-frozen body of a 40-something-year-old man that was found in the Alps a few years ago. And they've been doing a lot of research on him. He is now considered to have come from the Italian side. And so there is a museum and a freezer that has his body in it in the town of Bolzano on the Italian side, which I visited. He's been more or less given in Europe the name Otzi, O-T-Z-I, Otzi, not Iceman anymore. And there's a lot of people that go and visit the museum for Otzi, with good reason. 4,000 years ago, he was doing really well. He had really great boots and a really nice waist pack that had his medicine and his fire tools in it. And then he had a quiver on his back with several finished arrows and several unfinished arrows. He had a nice hat of bear fur. He was really all set up just beautifully. Whoever these folks were, they knew what they were doing. He had a couple of knives with him. He was going out, across the mountains by himself. So I was there and then went hiking up into the mountains above and looked over the area, the pass that his body was found on. So this is a little piece called Otzi Crosses Over. My imagination. I concluded that he was crossing the range to get to a settlement on the other side where his daughter lived. He had unfinished arrows in his quiver that he would finish over the winter, and he'd return to the south side of the range next spring. Moretti and I had spent the day in Bolzano, studying his tools, clothes, herbs, flints, everything about him. And then when we were up in the Dolomite Ridge near Sulla Pass, I realized that we were looking far at the range that he had indeed walked over, and it all fell in place. On his way, he walks steady up the slope, bedrock and plant clumps, wind in his ear, beard waving a bit in the breeze, low clouds from the west in puffs, passing over and through the high peak points, blue sky gaps seen. Farther on, a set of white and gray cloud puffs hide a ridge, views through a notch to a further blue cloud shadow patches and sunshine. Breeze softens, getting into snow now, sun behind clouds, but still lots of light. Sore knee, painful shoulders, but about to step out on the ice field, cross it, and go down the other side. More snow, rock, alpine fir below. This moment, sun and wind. My little knife, my fire kit, my settled daughter, this lonely route. Stories in the night. In native California, the winter was storytelling time. Yesterday I was working most of the day with a breakdown in the system. Generator 1, generator 2, old phased out generator 3, the battery array, the big trace inverter, the solar panels, all had stopped. Cold early morning in the dark. Back to the old days. Kerosene lamps, candles, wood stoves always work. The backup generator number 3, Honda, cycles wrong. Tricking inverter relays that start the bulk charge. Big green Onan, fueled by propane, wouldn't start. One time turned out there was a clogged air cleaner. Oil drops blow back up from deep inside. I try to remember machinery can always be fixed. But be ready to give up the plans that were made for the day, or go back to the manual, call up friends who know more, make some tea, relax with your tools, with your problems, start enjoying the day. For 15 years we lived here, kerosene lamps, heavy tile roof in the shade of a pre-contact black oak. Sherry, Siegfried's longtime woman friend and partner, is due at any time with a 9-ton truck of crushed rock. Wet dirt every winter eats up gravel, keeping a few hard roads for drenching winter rains and melting snow takes planning, and you have to ditch them too. In 1952, going all through Kyushu with Joanne, we walked around in Hiroshima. Busy streets, coffee shops, green leafy trees and gardens. A lovely place. But at Mount Aso, the great caldera in the center of the island, that's Kyushu, a crater 30 miles across, we saw sightseers from Nagasaki with that twisted, shiny, scarred, burned face of survivors from those days. And then I read Barefoot again in its English translation, a graphic novel available in English now, drawn by a person who lived through the bombing of Hiroshima himself. It's really quite remarkable, and is full of kind of creepy cheer, even as it goes through its frank telling of everything. What got me about the bomb was so much power, too much, and then the temptation there to be the first, to be the emperor of the world, yet to be done. So, change our course around, or there we had. I could never be a Muslim, a Christian, or a Jew, because the 10 Commandments fall short of moral rigor. The Bible shalt not kill leaves out the other realms of life. How could that be? What sort of world did they think this is? With no account for all the wriggling feelers and the little fins, the spines, the slimy necks, eyes shiny in the night, the paw prints in the snow. And that other thing, can't have no other God before me, like profound anxiety of power and jealousy and envy? What sort of God is that? Worrying all the time. Plenty little gods are waiting to begin their practice and learn just who they are. In North India, 4th century AD, some Buddhist tantric teacher lady said, "That God called Yahweh to the West, he's really something. But too bad. He has this nutty thing that he's creator of the world." A delusion that could really set you back. But returning to energy, I'll fix the Onan. I'll give up on number 3, it's too far gone. And next time get a backup generator with a cast iron block and water cooling and a warranty good for centuries. Put in a bunch more panels for the sun. The old-time people here in warm earth lodges 30 feet across burned pitchy pine wood slivers for their candles, snow after snow for all those centuries before. Lodge fire lights and pitchy slivers burning don't need much light for stories in the night. You know what proves that nobody reads poetry? Nobody has come to get me yet. I guess that's a good thing. Well,
They don't know where you are.
a letter to M.A. who lives far away. This is going to be my final point tonight. Some years ago, I had a brief correspondence by letter with a young woman who lived up in British Columbia. She was about 13 at the time. I had known her parents when they had been in California. And she wrote me and wanted to know about writing poetry. And then to prove her point, she sent me a letter which was all in rhyme. And so that's what I did back to her. And so this is a letter to M.A., who lives far away. She lives in Vancouver, British Columbia now, and she works as she calls herself a professional adventure clown. And she has several clown costumes, and she gets into adventures. Now, I don't know what that means. Dear Melissa, I do remember you. You had curly hair and stood by the stair up there on Quadra Isle with a shy smile. Say hello to your mother Jean. I don't remember your sister's name, and that's a shame, but I sort of remember her face and natural grace. Not all poetry has to rhyme, but this time I'm writing back the way you did it. It's to your credit. You got me to write this form, since real poetry is born from a formless place, which is our original face. Zen Buddhists say, in play. So if this helps you to be a writer, it will please your new friend, Harry Snyder. Well, we're going to rearrange this just a little bit right now, and then Keith and I are going to have a little conversation. So who are the movers and shakers here? Okay. Yeah, I think we want to just set that on the ground.
Thanks so much. That was amazing, Gary. Thank you. It's such a blessing that you're here. If you are getting up, we're going to have pizza soon. Get some pizza, come back. And if you do happen to have to leave early, just be real careful and kind when you're leaving. There's a lot of cars, and we had so many people here tonight. Thank you for coming, and please stay for the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary, I took a drink of the water I poured. I noticed you didn't. But if you need, the water that I poured for you.
Oh, well, I'll drink some of it too then.
I have no diseases.
If you haven't died, I'm fine.
Thanks. Sarah wants me to ask questions, and so I've been thinking of questions. We thought it might be a little too cumbersome to go out there, so unless there's something you really need to know and shout out, you're going to have to listen to my questions. I hope that's okay. I thought I wanted to start tonight just partly to honor the place where we're at, and also because you've read a lot, those of you who read Snyder, you've read a lot about his thoughts about Buddhism, the stories of his travels in Buddhist countries. But I hadn't heard, there's not a lot in print in the interviews and things of how he came to Buddhism. So we know that he has this rural childhood in the Pacific Northwest, poor, spends a lot of time outdoors. We know he goes off to Reed College, where he meets people that are important to him for the rest of his life. But I thought I'd see if I could get him to tell us how he came to Buddhism, how a person from that background came to understand Buddhist thought, and then maybe a little bit about the first books, the first teachers that he was confronted with in that study, if he'll do it.
It's too complicated to do it in detail, or maybe not really worth doing it in detail, but partly my own inclination led me, for inscrutable reasons, to spend a lot of time out in the forest near our place, and we were surrounded by forests. We were north of Seattle, about 10 or 12 miles, in the area that had been clear cut a few decades earlier, that had been old growth forest. And so it was a recovering old growth forest full of some extraordinary stumps, 8 to 12 feet high stumps of Douglas fir that were 10 feet in diameter, were scattered through the woods there, with the rapid vine maple and cascara regrowth underneath that, and a lot of native blackberry vines, not the later invasive Himalayan berry vines. But the deer were gone at that time, and the bear had gone. I guess they had just, taken off to go to someplace quieter for a while, because everything is back now. I was struck, and I talked a little bit about this earlier today to one of the classes. My parents were secular people. Frankly, they were socialists and Marxists, like so many people in the Pacific Northwest at that time. The Pacific Northwest was full of radicals for a while, and everybody of college age was a kind of a Marxist pacifist. My cousin was one of the organizers of the Pacifist League of the University of Washington, and so forth. And so I took a lot of these ideas for granted, that we don't need to have a major single deity or anything like that. And nobody in my family went to church at all. But my parents nonetheless thought, as a cultural matter, maybe you should go to Sunday school a little bit and see what it's like. So I went to the Lutheran church down the road. It was a mile and a half to walk. And went to Sunday school a few times. And one of the heifers that I was raising got sick and died. Guernsey heifer. So one of those times in Sunday school, I said to the Sunday school teacher, who was a nice gentleman, my heifer has died, and I'll see my heifer in heaven. And he said, no, you won't see your heifer in heaven. Your heifer can't go to heaven. And I said, well, why not? And he said, well, animals don't go to heaven. I said, really? I said, well, I'm not going then. And I pulled back from Sunday school and never went again. That was the end of that. And then somewhere in some magazine, some publication somewhere, when I was 12 or 13, I read that about the world religions, that some of the Hindus, some of Indian religion, I was thinking of Gandhi, for example, and the Buddhists traditionally, in their ethics, in their religious ethics, will say that you should be careful about taking the life or causing harm to any sentient being at all, not just human beings. And I realized that the Ten Commandments were the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," is addressed only to human beings. Is in regard only to human beings, and nobody thinks that it need to be applied to any other kinds of beings. However, to give Christians their due, there has been, especially in England, a tradition of that goes back into the 19th century of being kindly to animals and a moral outrage about cruelty to animals. And that is maybe more of a British thing than it is in some other European cultures. And it's more in, it is of more account in some parts of America than other parts. But it is a basic account throughout most of the Buddhist world, even though the Buddhist world doesn't always know quite what to do with it. However, in the Buddhist world, it is not, as Gandhi would have had it, or Martin Luther King, a commandment that says, "Thou shalt not kill any animals at all, or any living beings at all." It says, cause the least possible harm, like doctors. Don't take life lightly. Don't take life unless you have a really good reason to need to. And if you do, express your gratitude, which is the way native people, earlier people, foraging cultures, hunting and gathering cultures, and peasant cultures all over the world have done for millennia, before having any necessarily required religious code that they lived by. The truth is, all the little kids have a really good heart, and they don't want to hurt the money, and they don't want to make the little kitten squeal. Well, with the exception for those very bad boys. So that got me started. And then once I got into some further reading, and the Tao Te Ching was one of my earliest readings in these things, and it's not even a Buddhist text. It's a basic Chinese text, and a very, very early, 4th century maybe BC Chinese text, The Way and Its Power, the Tao Te Ching, attributed to Lao Tzu, but there is no Lao Tzu. And just like the Zhuangzi text is attributed to Zhuangzi, but there is no Zhuangzi that we know of. So there is some early Chinese texts that reflect undoubtedly the previous 1,000 years or so of Chinese folk religion in certain ways, at least some parts. And, I shouldn't say Chinese, we're talking about what little group of the pre-Han people of, what river valley. In Sima Qian's History of China, he dismisses everybody who lives south of the Yangtze River, saying they are all just monkeys that wear hats. They don't count them as being serious human beings even. And so, it takes a while. So I don't know, you were asking me what teachers?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was a tireless nerd. And so the next thing I think I read was that big collection from Harvard University Press on Theravadan translations. H.C. Warren, was that? Yeah. And I found it very impressive to see the clarity and the rationality and the craziness of the polytext people, trying to talk about how to analyze your own feelings and how to analyze your own behavior in a non-dogmatic and in a non-theistic way. My family was just enough of an atheist family that I assumed that any way I solved the spiritual problems of the world, I'd have to do it without falling back on God as part of my excuse. And so I've done that ever since. And I tried to avoid, that very sophisticated move that some of the top members of the Catholic hierarchy use, which is to say, well, God really is emptiness. But they don't say that except to Buddhists. There is no God, but that's God. Oh boy, is that subtle.
To switch gears, but not really. I want to I want to hear just a little bit of some of your thoughts about the current state of the natural world and the ideas of the natural world. By the way, one of the recent books of Gary's that's out are the collected letters of Gary Snyder and Wendell Berry, a friendship that for those of you who, like I do, spend too much time parsing American letters, this might seem like a very odd combination, other than the fact they both live in the country. But this is a fabulous collection of letters, nuanced and smart, and goes on for many decades. But I want to go back to Practice of the Wild, and if I remember correctly, and I didn't have time to look it up, of course, but if I remember correctly, I think that in the Practice of the Wild, you say that the thing that scares you the most about the condition of the world is a shrinking gene pool, the problems of extinction. I wonder if that is still your greatest fear, or if the fear has been changed or altered or modified in some significant way.
Yeah, well, that was in 1970 when I first came back from Japan, that I felt, and I was thinking in terms of all of the insults and damage being done to the environment, which are reversible and which are irreversible. Open pit mining is reversible. Hydraulic mining is reversible. Laying waste to the surface of the earth is reversible. There's a lot that, bad as it is, the planet can outlive, and will undoubtedly outlive, as it has done many times over. But one thing I thought at that time is that the potential of getaway radiation from careless handling of nuclear waste, what that could do to the gene pool, or what simply the loss of species, the destruction of species. Extinction is forever. If a species is extinct, it's extinct. It's not going to come back. It can't be reversed. And there's a lot of evidence that the diversity of the gene pool on the planet is seriously under attack. Not just the big charismatic, obvious animals, like it seems very likely that lions will be gone before long, except in a few zoos. And it seems likely that the same will happen to tigers. It practically already has happened to the Siberian tiger, of which there are not many individuals left. And it's happening in a number of other species. The blue whale is down, they say, to only 10,000 individuals living in all of the oceans of the world. And part of the problem that blue whales have, which is the largest living being now, is that they can't hear each other because of all the noise that is generated by ships with engines and the experiments that the Navy does with sound and so forth. The whales cannot hear each other to get together to make love and make more baby whales. This seems to be one of the serious problems of the blue whales. I said to my cardiologist, they're looking at my heart right now to see if I have a heart. And I asked her an innocent question, just, in between sentences. I said, is the structure of a whale's heart the same as the structure of a human heart? Because she had a big chart of the heart on the wall, like they do in your doctor's office. And I said, and what about mice hearts? And so she said, nobody ever asked that question to me before. Let's look it up. So she opens up her computer and brings up a blue whale heart on the screen that has been dissected and opened up by biologists. And inside one of the chambers of the heart are 3 people standing up. That's how big a blue whale heart is. She said, it's just like a human heart. Yeah. I said, well, good for it. It makes you think, boy, the mammal kingdom is really something. But now, to finish your question, it's not just that the possibilities of the destruction of the gene pool through radiation or extinction, simple extinction is going on. It's that whole habitat, like the marine habitat that is affected by all that plastic waving around, or more chemicals than ever before getting out into certain situations, that the different habitats of the planet, both marine and terrestrial, are under attack. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that don't particularly care about that. They don't think it's their problem to think about. And then it's happening so fast that nobody can keep up with it anyway. Like the migrant exodus into Europe. This is out of hand. It's totally out of hand. Hey, folks, that's the modern world now. I think that we're going to see a lot of other problems very much like that simply override what you thought you could do or should do.
Wow. My last question seems almost trivial, but I'm going to get around it by saying that it's one of Sarah Messer's questions. Sarah, as long as she's been doing this, has had a list of 10 questions that she throws on us, those of us who come out here and read poems. And they always come as a bit of a surprise. And this one, when she asked me, I really didn't, I'm usually not at a loss for words, but when she asked me this, I really didn't know how to respond. And my first response was, well, Sarah, that's really intimate. I like you lots, but I'm not sure I can go there. But I thought I'd ask you that question. And you can look at Sarah when you answer it, and I know that she's planning on putting the answers to these questions in some kind of YouTube form. So the question that I want to ask you, that Sarah Messer asks all the poets, is, what does it mean to write a poem? I had the same response.
What was that?
I just sat there for a while.
Well, you know, like Mr. Natural says, don't mean nothing. Don't mean shit. I love that response. What is the meaning of life, Mr. Natural? Don't mean shit.
And that was that. So guys, go back there and get some of that good food. Buy those books. I think Gary's going to sit up here and he's going to sign those books, whether he wants to or not. No, it's his choice entirely, so be nice to him. Thank you, Gary, very much. Thanks for being with us.